dense red dust clouds when the hot, dry winds scoured it, or turned to bleeding, glutinous red mud when the thunderstorms thrashed its surface. Red was the colour of the diggings. It stained the hair of dogs and beasts of burden, it stained the clothing of the men and their beards and the skin of their arms, it stained their canvas tents, and coated the corrugated iron shanties of the settlement. Only in the gaping hole below where Zuga stood was the colour altered to the soft yellow of a thrush's breast. The hole was almost a mile across, the rim of it nearly a perfect circle, and its bottom already 200 feet deep in places. The men working down there were tiny insect figures, spiders perhaps, for only spiders could have spun the vast web that glittered in a silvery cloud over the entire excavation. Zuga paused a moment to lift the wide-brimmed hat, its pointed peak stained by his own sweat and the blown red dust. Carefully he mopped the beads of sweat from the smooth, paler skin along his hairline, and then inspected the damp red stain on the silk bandana and grimaced with distaste. His dense curling hair had been protected by the hat from the fierce African sunlight, and was still the colour of smoked wild honey, but his beard had been bleached to pale gold, and the years had laced it with silver strands. His skin was dark also, baked like a crust of new bread, only the scar on his cheek was porcelain white where the elephant gun had burst so many years before. There were little creases below his eyes from squinting in the sunlight at far horizons, and harsh lines cut his cheeks from the corner of his nose and ran down into the beard, lines of hardship and heartbreak. He looked down into the gaping pit below him, and the green of his eyes clouded as he remembered the high hopes and bounding expectation that had brought him here. Was it 10 years before? It seemed like a day and an eternity. He had first heard the name Colesberg Kopje when he had stepped out of the bumboat onto the beach at Rogger Bay below the vast square monolithic bulk of Table Mountain, and the sound of it made his skin tingle and raised the hair at the nape of his neck. "They have struck diamonds at Colesberg Kopje. Diamonds big as grape shot and so thick they'll wear out the soles of your boots just walking across them." In a clairvoyant flash he had known that this was where his destiny would lead him. He knew that the 2 years he had just spent in Old England trying desperately to raise backing for his grand venture in the north had been marking time for this moment. The road to the north began in the diamond gravels of Colesberg Kopje. He knew it with certainty as he heard the name. He had one single wagon left, and a depleted span of draft oxen. Within 48 hours they were plodding through the deep sands that clogged the track across the Cape Flats, northward 600 miles to that Kopje below the Vaal River. The wagon carried all his possessions, and there were precious few of these. 12 years following a grandiose dream had wasted his substance all away. The considerable royalties from the book that he had written after his travels to the unexplored lands below the Zambezi River, the gold and ivory that he had brought back from that remote interior, the ivory from 4 more hunting expeditions to that same haunting and yet sadly flawed paradise, all of it was gone. Thousands of pounds and 12 years of heartbreak and frustration, until the splendid dream had become clouded and soured, and all he had to show for it was a tattered scrap of parchment on which the ink was beginning to yellow, and the folds were almost worn through so that it had to be glued to a backing sheet to hold it together. That parchment was the Ballantine concession title for 1,000 years to all the mineral wealth of a huge tract of the wild African interior, a tract the size of France, which he had cajoled from a savage black king. In that vast territory, Zuga had panned red native gold from the outcropping quartz reef. It was a rich land, and all of it was his, but it needed capital, huge amounts of capital to take possession of it and to win the treasures that lay below it. Half his adult life had been spent in a struggle to raise that capital, a fruitless struggle, for he had not yet found a single man of substance to share his vision and his dream with him. Finally, he had in desperation appealed to the British public. He had journeyed to London once more to promote the formation of the Central African Lands and Mining Company to exploit his concession. He had designed and had printed a handsome brochure extolling the riches of the land he had named Zambezia. He had illustrated the pages with his own drawings of fine forests and grassy plains abounding with elephant and other game. He had included a facsimile of the original concession, with the great elephant seal.
Para seguir escuchando este audiolibro gratuitamente, haz clic en el enlace de la descripción y podrás escucharlo completo sin coste gracias a la prueba de 30 días de Audible.